Welcome to the launch of the Caribbean Perspectives on Escazú campaign, Our Rights, Our Future. The aim of the campaign is to educate the population across the region on the Escazú Agreement and to strengthen the capacity of civil society organizations to advocate for its ratification in their own countries with a greater understanding of how it helps to support their work. I'm Dahvia Hylton, President of the Jamaica Climate Change Youth Council and Acting Coordinator of the Stronger Caribbean Together Network. Thank you for joining us for this hour and for taking a stance for the environment. We will be engaging in interesting discussions about this one of a kind regional agreement called the Escazú Agreement. Created in Escazú, Costa Rica, the agreement protects the rights of environmental defenders, people who put their lives on the line for the sake of the planet and everything and everyone on it. Throughout this evening's discussions, we will learn more about the Escazú, the term environmental defender, how the Escazú supports their work, the pillars of the Escazú Agreement, and how we can use it in our everyday lives and or activism. In the meantime, please take the time to fill out our pre-survey to aid in our data collection efforts. You can find the link in the chat. We would love to hear more about your level of experience, if any, with Escazú before we dive in. As the evening progresses, we will hear from vital environmental defenders across the region who are doing the work on the ground that the Escazú supports. We will hear from Mr. John Mussington about his work with the Barbuda Lands Rights Committee, Dr. Theresa Rodriguez-Moodie from the Jamaica Environment Trust, who is spearheading a local campaign on Escazú in Jamaica, and we will hear from Mr. Bishnu Tulsie, elected representative under the Escazú Agreement. So we have a range of experts for you today, and we look forward to your questions in the chats and the discussions that will ensue. First, we will be right back to engage with with our speakers after this message.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much, Dahvia. Hello, environmental defenders. I'm Christine Samwaroo. I'll be your moderator for this evening. Thank you so much for joining our launch of our campaign, Caribbean Perspectives on Escazú, Our Rights, Our Future. Today, as we gather to discuss something very close to my heart, the protection of human rights, the environment, and the people who defend both, we acknowledge that it is a very difficult day for many of us. In times like these, we must remember to draw strength from each other. In moments of disappointments, we must remind ourselves that collective action continues to spark change. As justice leaders, we are well aware that our struggles are connected, our lives are political, and when we speak of human rights, we stand in solidarity with those whose voices continue to be silenced and whose rights are denied across the globe. We think of our comrades in Palestine, in Haiti, in Sudan, in Congo, in Lebanon, and Tigray. These struggles are part of our own. The Escazú Agreement, formerly called the Regional Agreement on Access to Information, Public Participation, and Justice in Environmental Matters in Latin America and the Caribbean, was adopted in 2018 in Escazú, Costa Rica. It's a groundbreaking instrument that guarantees people's right to access environmental information, participate in decision making that affects their life, and access justice in environmental matters. One of the most critical and transformative components of this agreement is the protection of environmental defenders. Actually, it's the first in history we have a legally binding document that explicitly protects those on the front line of defending the environment. Governments who ratify the Escazú Agreement are required to provide safe and enabling conditions for environmental defenders and ensure that perpetrators and intimidation against them are held accountable. Today, we come together with the goal of strengthening public awareness around the Escazú Agreement and its significance in the Caribbean. We are deeply grateful to our esteemed panelists for joining this conversation, and we look forward to hearing from them on how this agreement plays a pivotal role in their fight for environmental justice throughout the Caribbean. I'm really, really honored to welcome our guests to the conversation. Hello, panelists. Thank you so much for being here this afternoon. We appreciate your time. Hello, Mr. Mussington, Mr. Tulsie, and Dr. Theresa Moodie. I hope you're all doing well despite everything that's going on today. As we begin the discussion, I would really like for you to tell us a little bit about your work and how the Escazú Agreement supports it. Perhaps we can start with Dr. Moodie.
Okay, put me on the spot. Hi, Christine. Thank you so much for having me. You started by saying about this issue being so dear to your heart. It is actually very important as well for the work that we are doing. In fact, if you're an environmental defender, this whole agreement is absolutely critical. So just very quickly, JET is a nonprofit, non-government organization with over 30 years experience in promoting environmental protection across Jamaica. And we do this through public education, advocacy, and community-based initiatives. We're basically working to address some of the most pressing environmental challenges that Jamaica faces. And for those who environmental defenders is a term that is relatively new, and many people don't even see themselves as environmental defenders. But we are people, that groups or individuals that take peaceful action to protect the environment, and we advocate for the conservation and sustainable use of natural resources. And sometimes this ends up putting our lives at risk in order to uphold these rights and these issues, to get these issues addressed. In Jamaica, as in many Caribbean countries, environmental defenders play a critical role in advocating for sustainable development, for biodiversity protection, for resilience to climate change. And we do this through various activities. Sometimes we challenge projects. We advocate for things like public participation in environmental governance. We defend the rights of communities to access to clean water. We raise awareness on a number of these issues, a number of these risks faced by projects or issues like climate change. But what is absolutely important is that in order to be an effective environmental defender, you do need access to information. You need meaningful public participation. You need justice, and you need protection. So essentially, the Escazú Agreement, and those are the pillars of the Escazú Agreement. So essentially, everything that we do at JET and as environmental defenders really has a lot to do with all the pillars that are a part of the Escazú Agreement. We need protection because sometimes we face physical threats, legal harassment, criminalization. We need access to information because if you don't have timely information, data on projects and policies and so forth, this is absolutely crucial to being able to take action. So access to information is very important. Public participation. There needs to be opportunities for meaningful participation in decision-making process. And I don't mean a town hall meeting or just saying that there's a stakeholder consultation. I really mean meaningful public participation and justice and accountability. Justice, when environmental defenders are harmed or are wrongfully targeted, we need access to justice to seek redress. We need access to justice to be able to challenge a decision that has been made. And it's not always easy, it's not affordable. And so these are essentially, the Escazú Agreement is absolutely critical to the work that we do at JET. And to be meaningful advocates, it's absolutely critical to the work that you do.
Yes, thank you so much for outlining that. And I remember in our initial conversation, you said something that that stayed with me. And you said that in all our work, despite having the agreement or not, we are embedding the principles of the agreement within our work. And I really took that for granted, what you said. And I really appreciate all the things that you're doing with JET. Thank you so much. And now we're going to hear from Mr. Bishnu. Mr. Bishnu, welcome to the conversation. Thank you so much for joining. And I'll ask you the same question. Can you share a little bit about your work and how the Escazú Agreement supports it?
Thank you, and thanks for having me in this conversation. Um, I recently retired from my, so I am going to put a little different spin on your question, and I will talk about issues we had and how the Escazú Agreement could have supported it had it been in place. I was the former director of the St. Lucia National Trust, and as a heritage conservation organization, environmental protection is an important part of that, but so is protection of heritage sites. And there are several cases, and I will zero in on one, in which development threatened elements of cultural heritage. And as the premier heritage management organization in St. Lucia, we will always step in and take a stand on it. There was a particular case in which we knew that a development was being proposed. It was big money and political power behind it, and but getting information on what is being planned and how they were going to go about it, um, you was scarce. You weren't hearing much about anything, and we realized that we needed public support in numbers to counterbalance the money and the power that was behind this project. And we started a campaign, at the national level, even at the international level. In fact, we were able to get 38 international organizations to write to the government. But had we had access to the information we needed to make our case, it would have been a much simpler proposition to have the project stopped. And the Escazú Agreement is the tool that is supposed to guarantee, and I underscore supposed to guarantee access to that information and access to justice. So it is in situations like that that, as a party to the Escazú Agreement, the St. Lucia government would have had an obligation to provide the information and therefore enable us to pursue our goal of ensuring that either the project was stopped or it was redone in a way that would minimize, if not eliminate, environmental impacts. So, as it's an important tool, at the end of the day, it is the extent to which state parties, will honor the commitments under it. But like I said, had it been in place, it would have been another tool in the toolbox we went to advocate against that project. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that real life, example. And like you rightfully said, it is a tool that we as environmental defenders, activists, civil society members can use within our various countries and communities. Thank you so much. And you both started speaking on your countries. And I guess for us to dig in a little deeper and to give our audience a little bit of a better understanding, what is the current status of the Escazú Agreement in your country? Perhaps we can start with Jamaica and then St. Lucia.
Sure. So, I mean, very short story, really. Jamaica signed the Escazú Agreement in 2019, and we have yet to ratify it or accede to it. So I'm not sure what's the correct terminology. I understand that Jamaica was very involved in the negotiations in terms of the language and the text of the agreement, but for some reason we haven't crossed the finish line. And so this is, I know we're going to get into it a little later, but this is one of the reasons why we're pushing for it. But we also recognize that we in the Caribbean, at least in Jamaica, we tend to sign these agreements, we tend to sign these documents a lot, and it doesn't actually translate to much sometimes. And so I think it's for us, it's not just about making sure that we ratify. This is why what you had said earlier, that even if we don't even cross that finish line, I think what's very important is that at the very least we see an improvement in the access to information, the public participation, etc., and so forth, all the different pillars, the 4 different pillars that we're talking about. But again, the important part about the Escazú Agreement is all the different other parts of it that, in terms of, you know, if you've ratified, what it means if they don't follow through on certain things, then you can take action, you can file a complaint and so forth. And I think that's the part that's very important about the Escazú Agreement as well. So we're not there yet. We hope that at the end of our project, we'll be that much closer to it, if not already there. But yeah.
Thank you so much for that insight. And Mr. Tulsie? So, Mr. Tulsie, if you're speaking, you might be on mute.
Yes, I was speaking, and sorry. Yeah. At the beginning of this whole process, the National Trust where I work took a very keen interest in the Escazú Agreement. And as an NGO without any funding to do this, we invested our own resources in sending representatives to the meetings. We were not a state government, so we had to do that. But we saw the importance, and we were involved throughout the process leading up to the adoption of the agreement. It was signed by St. Lucia, and St. Lucia is now a full party to the Escazú Agreement. And the government has taken over the Escazú Agreement on Island, and they have actually completed their action plan, which should be adopted soon and hopefully begin to roll out. So St. Lucia is quite advanced in this.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And it's definitely really great to hear that a small Caribbean island is taking lead and leading the way, because we know the significance of this agreement in our region. We know that within the Latin America region, the case for environmental defender is very stark, and it's one of the most dangerous places to be an environmental defender. And in the Caribbean, we know the importance with everything that's going on. I can speak from my own country in Guyana, and the importance of ratifying, yes, but the importance more so of implementation and educating citizens about this really important agreement. I'm so grateful for our two previous speakers, and we have a third speaker. I'm going to bring Mr. Mussington into the conversation. We know we were having some tech issues, but we're hoping that probably you can hear us and communicate. Let's hear if you're able to hear and see us.
Yes, I'm able to hear and see you, Christine, and greetings to everyone in the audience and on the internet. Good to be here.
This is great. Great to have you. I'm so grateful for you being in this conversation, because you have so much to add. And I'll ask you the two previous questions. So the first is, can you share a little bit about your work and how the Escazú Agreement supports it?
Yes, I am actually an environmentalist. That's what they used to call those of us who are concerned about things that are happening in the environment and so on. But besides that, I'm actually trained in terms of my first degree and my postgraduate diploma from the SERMIS. So for the past 30, going on 40 years, I've actually worked as a consultant on teams that are doing environmental assessments, not only in Antigua and Barbuda, but throughout the Caribbean. So that is my background. So I have an intimate knowledge in terms of that sort of assessment and that sort of work. Now, apart from that, I'm also very much interested in my island, my country. I'm a scientist, I'm a teacher, educator, I'm now retired. And so that is how I entered the whole scenario. Now, Barbuda, where I'm from, we got hit by a hurricane in 2017. And as a result of that, everyone was moved off the island as a precaution for another storm which was approaching. since that storm did not arrive, we found that we were still kept off of the island. And so when some of us did return, we realized that there was massive land clearing and so on going on. So as a result of that, I made my inquiries. I inquired from the physical planning department, the Development Control Authority, whether or not permit has been given, only to be told no. And as a result of that, I realized that something was going totally wrong. So, long story short, we eventually filed a legal action against the Development Control Authority and the government in terms of seeking to get a judicial review because of the fact that all these things were going on. And based on my personal knowledge of the Escazú Agreement, as well as the past experience I've had in terms of the requirements for permits and EIAs, environmental impact assessments, I realized that something was going on that was very wrong. And based on my knowledge of the Escazú, I know that when it comes to the environment, the stakeholders, those persons who are going to be affected, they are entitled to information. They are entitled to have a say in terms of what was going on. So we were able to mount a legal challenge. And as a result of that legal challenge, it went on for a number of years, 6 years almost. And fortunately, we went as far as our appellate court, our final appellate court, which was the Privy Council. And the Escazú Agreement was actually used and referenced in terms of making the final decision as to whether or not we were able to continue. We actually were being challenged from a point of view that the government was saying we had no legal standing to be able to bring an action like that. And so as a result of the Escazú, we were able to have that acknowledged that we do have standing, and the Escazú Agreement as a regional agreement gives us that authority. So that's my background, and that's what my experience with the Escazú Agreement has been.
Thank you so much for sharing, and such a real example. And I'm so grateful to hear about the success of the case that went all the way to the Privy Council, and we continues fight with the Barbuda people and the land rights actors within the country. Thank you so much. And we
Yes.
look forward to learning a bit more. So now we'll turn our attention back to Dr. Rodriguez-Moodie from the Jamaica Environmental Trust. And you alluded to it earlier, but you mentioned that you have been actively using the Escazú Agreement to engage the public. And one of the things that you have right now that you're executing within Jamaica is a national campaign on the Escazú within the next 2 years. So I'm curious to know, how do you see the agreement's role in advancing environmental justice in Jamaica? And can you share a bit more about your national campaign?
All right, thanks, Christine. Okay, so as I'd mentioned to you earlier, as environmental defenders, we need access to information. We actively participate. So we use the Access to Information Act that we have here in Jamaica heavily. We participate as much as we can in public events, public discussions, but we also write consistently about the issues related to public participation. So, for example, we're hearing about the possibility of nuclear energy being introduced into Jamaica, but there has not been much discussion in any meaningful way with the public about what this looks like. It's kind of been an announcement. So one of our pushbacks is, what about that meaningful public participation that is necessary? So everything about the Escazú Agreement is meaningful to our work. But in discussions earlier this year, we were going to a lot of these different meetings where we were hearing from other environmental defenders, youth defenders, hearing the issues in the Caribbean, and realized that a lot of environmental defenders, and I'm going to be specific now to Jamaica, had never heard of the Escazú Agreement, or maybe had heard of the Escazú Agreement but didn't quite understand the importance of it, because sometimes we hear these these fluffy words, and I mean, it's a long title, and sometimes we don't quite understand it. We're not paying attention to it necessarily. But when we started to really just understand the basic pillars and how it really relates to everybody, their work, our work, we we decided maybe we needed to do some education. Maybe we need to really engage. And there was a previous project that was done by another NGO and on a much smaller scale. And what we're trying to do is to kind of continue that, to do a lot more with it. So ultimately, our project, it aims to support environmental defenders in Jamaica. The project is intended to be executed over a 2-year period, and we started in August of this year. It is funded by the Jeff Small Grants Program, and it is to advocate for the Jamaican government to ratify the Escazú Agreement, but also to build a safer and more inclusive framework for environmental defenders in Jamaica. So we plan to achieve this in 3 ways. So the first way really is we have to raise awareness and education. So we aim to broaden understanding of the Escazú Agreement, much like what you're doing here this evening, but from in a very intimate, kind of very close-up way with and fellow environmental defenders in Jamaica. Many people who don't even see themselves as environmental defenders. So sometimes it's even about, do you know what that term means, and do you think you are an environmental defender? So it's really getting granular with that conversation. So we want to have this discussion with the public, with the advocates, with the policymakers. We're going to be doing workshops. We've already started. We're doing media outreach, educational campaigns to really work towards highlighting the core principles of the treaty. The second thing is that we hope to support and protect environmental defenders through the work. We want to focus on providing that support who often face risks. We don't have a comprehensive database of local environmental defenders. We don't have a situation analysis to document the challenges that they face. Nothing is written down. And so when you go to these meetings at the regional level, the Caribbean is not well represented. And or when you hear the testimonials at these sessions, a lot of it is from Latin America. And it's almost as if the Caribbean doesn't have these issues because maybe we don't have the issues that have escalated to the point, for example, of murder and torture. But the fact is there are a lot of issues that environmental defenders face, but they're not being documented. So we are hoping to do that, to inform recommendations for how we can strengthen legal protection and access rights for fellow environmental defenders. And we also want to advocate for policy change. Really, it's the ratification. So it's not so much as policy change, but ratification of the Escazú Agreement. So we're hoping to have dialogue. We've already reached out to representatives of the ministry. We have had no response at all, but we're hoping to kind of really, push and get those discussions going. We are hoping that with having dialogue and evidence-based type advocacy, showing them the kind of information that we're getting, while protecting the very same environmental defenders. So we have to be careful about how much information we divulge, because some works, we also don't want to make it difficult for some environmental defenders, depending on what they're doing, whether it means that it affects their funding and so forth. So we're also respectful of that. We want to advance the transparency. We want to advance public participation and legal protections. So at the end of the day, which I alluded to earlier, is ultimately we want the government to ratify, even at the end, because our project has a lifetime, it has a lifespan. So even at the end of the day, even if we don't get to that point of ratification, what we hope to see is significant improvements. And we have been making suggestions about what that public participation should look like, what that access to information, what are some very simple things that can be done, low-hanging fruits, so that we can make things more accessible to environmental defenders, because we play a very important role in managing Jamaica's environment. So by empowering environmental defenders and fostering an inclusive approach to environmental governance, we hope to make a lasting impact on on our journey towards sustainable development, on Jamaica's journey towards sustainable development and environmental justice.
I want to congratulate you on this national campaign, and I think it's exactly what our region needs. Of course, our campaign it's regional, but I think this campaign, this agreement, it's something that everyone should know about. And like we said earlier, it's a tool that we should be using. And unless we really take time to emphasize the importance and meet people where they are, they wouldn't be able to know how to really use this. It would just be another agreement on the shelf. But as I mentioned earlier, this is not meant to just be another agreement. It's something that's really instrumental in our protection in the work that we are doing. And I want to encourage I know there is a few persons joining us from Jamaica. Definitely reach out to the Jamaica Environmental Trust and learn more about this national campaign and how your organization and even as an individual how you can be involved. So as I turn my attention now, Mr. Bishnu, you are one of two Caribbean elected representative of the public under the Escazú Agreement, and we heard from Dr. Moodie that sometimes our voices in the Caribbean were not always represented in these regional discussion. It's not because the problem doesn't exist in our countries, in our territories. They exist, but it's a matter of representation. So I want to say congratulations, first of all, on being one of two Caribbean representative of the public under the Escazú Agreement. You have been deeply involved in international discussion. And I'm curious to know, can you reflect on the most recent conference of parties and share some of the highlights, some of the achievements that has stood out?
One moment, please. You know, yeah. Sorry about that. Um, yeah. Sorry. Yeah. At the COPs, of course, it is the parties who sit around the negotiating table. But the Escazú Agreement is developed in a way that allows the elected representatives an equal seat at the table, and it is through this mechanism that the issues that the public have has are brought to the negotiations. Prior to the COP, we have sessions with the public. Um, some of those are held well ahead of the COP through virtual meetings. And at the COP itself, prior to the opening, we are allowed space and time to meet with those who are there so that we could get an understanding of what the issues are that they're facing, and we could raise those during the negotiations. So the Escazú Agreement is unique in that regard, in that it allows the representatives of the public a seat at the table during the negotiations. COP3 was held in April of this year in Santiago, and there were a number of things that happened there. Some of the key decisions relate firstly to national implementation. There was a report on what is happening at the national level, and the meeting, of course, urged parties to continue step towards ratification. Well, it's no longer ratification; it is now accession to the agreement because it is in force. So that would target countries like Jamaica and to develop their national implementation plans and their roadmaps. Um, the action plan on human rights defenders was adopted at the COP at COP3, and this is really the document or the plan that is giving effect to the intention of the Escazú Agreement, and it's built on four pillars. One is creating and generating knowledge and awareness and dissemination of information on the rights and roles of persons and groups. So the work that is being done in Jamaica, that type of knowledge that's generated could be shared through the public mechanism. So that's the first one, about knowing who the defenders are and telling their stories. It's also the other pillar is about recognition, recognizing the work, not and taking steps to advance their work, help in developing a culture that fosters a healthy environment, strengthening democracy, access rights, and sustainable development issues. It's about recognition of the work of the defenders. There is a third pillar on which it is built, which is capacity building and cooperation for national implementation. And when we think about implementation, we need to remember that it is governments that are responsible for implementation. And this pillar is about capacity building, cooperation, working with institutions, legal institutions, ensuring that policy plans and programs are in place that are consistent with the spirit of the Escazú Agreement. And the fourth pillar is about evaluation and follow-up. There will be periodic reviews of the progress that is being made, and these reports will be sent to the parties so that we could look at the success or measure the success of the agreement. In terms of implementing that action plan, the parties agreed to create an open-ended ad hoc working group on human rights defenders, and this group would be in existence until 2030, and it will be one of the mechanisms through which the secretariat and parties and human rights defenders can work towards implementing that action plan. There was also a decision on gender mainstreaming in which the work of women and minority groups was highlighted, and steps taken to encourage. There was a rather strange decision on national focal points because there are some parties who seem to have multiple focal points with different focal points communicating different things to the secretariat. So the parties decided that this has to be streamlined, and there was a decision that countries need to name their focal points. An important thing that happened at COP3 is that, well, you're probably aware that there is a committee on implementation and compliance that was created under the agreement or within the body of the agreement. And it is this committee's role in a nutshell is to receive and act on reports of violations by state parties. It is also a mechanism through which state parties can seek assistance in interpreting the agreement and in understanding their role. So that committee was formally established, and during the COP, it made a presentation on how it will be conducting its work. Without going into the operational details and the logistical details, their role is to monitor compliance with the agreement by state parties, to provide advice and support to parties to advance implementation and compliance. They are also there to examine cases of allegations of non-compliance, and if non-compliance is proven, to advance recommendations. And of course, they submit their reports to the parties from time to time. So those were the main the highlights, the key outcomes of the COP. But I just want to emphasize what I said at the beginning, that that the elected representatives are the voices of the community, the communities and the environmental defenders at the table. You would appreciate that because it's an international agreement, that it's only state parties that would be making decisions. And like I said earlier, this agreement allows the public to have a voice during the negotiations. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you so much for your work, and we really appreciate understanding at the international or regional level what is taking place and having an understanding as our work, although it's national and local, it's necessary for us to understand how the agreement actually work at the national level. So thank you so much. Thank you everyone for sharing where you're joining us from in the chat. We really appreciate it. Definitely continue. I see persons are joining from all over the Caribbean, and I see there is a question in the chat. So I'm actually going to pass this over to Mr. Mussington as an environmental defender and as a leader, a part of the Barbuda Land Rights Committee. You are at the forefront of land rights. And there is a question in the chat on how community groups with limited budget, how can they fund legal cases using Escazú?
Yes, that's a very good question. The fact of the matter is that small communities, land defenders, environment defenders, we generally do not have a budget. In our situation, we were fortunate in that we were able to, for example, create a GoFundMe page, and we have members of our community that live in the diaspora, and so through that GoFundMe page, we were able to raise funds. But even more important than that, we were able to collaborate with international groups such as Global Legal Action Network, GLAN, as well as e-law. And it is through GLAN, for example, we were able to, with that GoFundMe page, to finance our initial legal challenges. Now I'm listening to the discussion and the way the Escazú is supposed to work. The reality on the ground is that there are many countries, and I can tell you many countries in the Caribbean, Antigua and Barbuda, for example. We were among the first to sign off on that agreement in 2018, I think, and to actually ratify. And I can tell you, while that was the case, we literally had issues in terms of benefiting from what the clauses and rights under the Escazú afforded us as citizens, as stakeholders. And so that is one of the reasons why we ended up in the court in the first place. And access to justice is a big issue because it is expensive. One of the issues we have, and I was at the last COP in April, and this was an issue that was raised. Our government, for example, and I think under our jurisprudence throughout the region, if you are going to ask for an injunction, in other words, you find out as an ordinary citizen, and ordinary citizens are environment defenders because everything in the environment affects people, people affect the environment. And so you find that the government is doing something that is affecting you. You begin to ask questions, as is your right. You end up not getting responses. You end up not getting the benefits of the agreement that your government have signed on to. Your only recourse is to go to the court. And one of the first things that we try to do is to get an injunction. In other words, you have a large scale activity, a project taking place, which is going to be wiping out, for example, wetlands. You cannot wait and go through the legal proceedings. By the time you are ready, the damage would have done. So an injunction is a very useful part of it. Now, one of the things that our jurisprudence allows is that you are going to be held to give an undertaking that in the event that you are not successful legally, you have to pay back. You can pay, compensate the government, for example, for lost monies in terms of your legal action. And as an ordinary citizen, who ordinary land defender, who ordinary citizen is going to be able to afford $50 million, $20 million in terms of what the government says this project is cost? So that sort of thing is a hindrance to actually getting the benefits that the Escazú Agreement affords you as a environment defender. And the ironic thing about it is that your government has signed on to this agreement. And it is not being implemented in terms of affording the rights under that agreement to the citizen. And so that is why you end up having to go to the courts, and the court is not a cheap um, entity. So one of the things that maybe need to happen if this agreement is to work properly is that throughout the region, access to justice in terms of fees and financing and so on, something has to be done about it, because in many cases, you will not be able to afford the cost of legal action. We are fortunate in terms of being able to get funding from our fellow diaspora members and members of the general public worldwide internationally who are sympathetic to our cause.
Thank you so much for sharing your experience. And, it's really putting into the reality of what this agreement means and in the reality of what it means on the ground for regular, everyday environmental defenders. As you mentioned, we depend on the environment for everything. So by all means, we're all environmental defenders. As we're coming down to the end of our program, we really appreciate all the questions that's being asked in the chat. And what we will do is we'll continue this conversation by answering those questions. We'll ask our panelists to respond and we'll share it on our social media. But the next question that I have for our panelists is, in the next 5 to 10 years, how do you envision the Escazú Agreement impacting environmental governance in the Caribbean? And what steps do you believe are necessary to ensure its full and effective implementation in our region? And I'll let anyone decide who wants to go first.
Yes, my vision, if I may go first, is that I I would love to see that the agreement is fully implemented. It's not going to happen unless that grievance committee is in place, so that when we find our individual governments are not living up to the clauses of that agreement, we can make a complaint in terms of the committee. And I would love to see that committee have exercised the power to influence signatories to the Escazú to actually act according to their obligations. So that is what I would wish to see in terms of the Escazú agreement throughout the region.
Thank you so much for that. And can we have a next speaker, please?
Yeah, if I could speak about what I'd like to see. Firstly, of course, I would like to see all countries ratify, accede to the agreement, so that we have full participation at the negotiation level. But perhaps more importantly, we need to deal with issues of compliance. Um, Being a party to the agreement is good, is a necessary first step, but it is about developing and implementing the roadmaps and the action plans at the national level that will give effect to the agreement at the national level. These are usually political considerations, and I think that the, the 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 environmental defenders that are active in the various countries need to spend some time and effort identifying a champion, someone within the decision making circle, maybe a particular member of cabinet who may be an environmental person himself, or maybe is more inclined to environmental protection, to be that voice within those discussions. Because, like I said, at the end of the day, it's implementation by the country, and those decisions are taken at a high level. Um, the third thing is what is happening in, for example, in Jamaica, documentation and publication of the issues that are happening, the challenges that are being faced, and possible solutions. So those are three key things I would like to mention at this time, in terms of having full ratification, in terms of identifying a champion, and documentation and sharing of information.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Dr. Theresa?
Okay, the benefits of going glass is that I can say ditto. um, no, I think what everybody has said is so absolutely important. In the next 5 to 10 years, I do want to see that we have um, all the Caribbean countries become parties to the agreement, and they've acceded to it. But more importantly, that it is being implemented. Because as I've mentioned before, we've seen these things being signed, and we've also seen nothing happen. And even if even if I know this question is really about how Escazú Agreement impacts governance, but even if we don't get to that point, I would like to see improvements in the pillars that we've just been speaking to. Because if we are to be effective, and environmental defenders are extremely important in terms of sustainable development, protecting our environment, and if we are to see things change, if we are to see an improvement in the management and protection of our environment, we need to have better access to information. We need to have more opportunities for meaningful participation. We need to have access to justice and protection. So I want to see that we have countries becoming parties to the agreement, implemented, but I also, at the very least, want to see it implemented, even if it is not implemented as Escazú. If we see those improvements right across the board, then it means that we have really made some progress, because it's not just about signing, it's really about putting it into action.
Thank you so much for that. Putting it into action. I think we can leave with that. And I want to say thank you, all three of you. Thank you so much for all the work that you continue to do at the national, regional level, at the local level. Thank you so much to all of you for sharing your expertise, your perspectives, your experience. We continue to draw inspiration from Mr. Mussington of what it actually means to be an environmental defender. Really grateful for all the work that Mr. Tulsie is working on at the regional level to share our own Caribbean experience. And we know that we'll continue to work very closely with Dr. Rodriguez-Moodie for the necessary work that she's doing in Jamaica. She and her team will continue to find ways to collaborate, because we understand that this conversation, we can't have a one-off conversation. It needs to be intentional, and it needs to happen often. And so I'm really, really grateful to know that you're executing a campaign in your country as well. As we move forward with this campaign, our goal is to raise awareness and build a strong foundation for the effective implementation of the Escazú Agreement. We must continue pushing for the necessary legal, institutional, and practical framework to ensure the rights of all Caribbean citizens, and particularly those defending the environment, and that they are protected, emphasizing what all three of our speakers mentioned. The Escazú Agreement, it's not just a document, it's a beacon of hope in a time when we're already taking action. And I hope tonight you've learned about action that's being taken in 3 different countries. It provides us with the tools we need to fight for justice, human rights, and environmental sustainability. Whether it's through gender justice, migration, the just transition, or even the impacts of deep sea mining, this agreement connects all of these struggles, because it's ultimately about protecting people and the planet. We must continue to stand united, raise our voice, and ensure that the people who are doing the hard work of defending our shared environment are protected and supported. Our campaign is just the beginning, and we hope that it sparks a broader conversation on how each of us can play a role in the implementation of this critical agreement. Thank you so much for being a part of our launch tonight. Together, we can shape a future that is just, sustainable, and equitable for all of us. And this is just the start. Keep lookout for all the different activities that we'll be doing under the campaign. Before I hand it over back to Dahvia, I would like to leave us with a few words from Angela Davis. And she said, the weight of oppression and injustice is felt deeply by those whose bodies and communities bear the brunt of it. But even in the face of such weight, the power to resist, to demand, to change is within all of us. The fight for justice is a collective one, and though the path is long, our solidarity is the force that will carry us through. Thank you so much, panelists. Hi, Dahvia, you're on mute.
Thank you. Once again, we would like to take the time to thank our panelists for taking time to chat with us this evening about their work and the Escazú. We have gained so much from your insights and we are emboldened by the work that you do. We would like to thank our partners in this campaign, FEMA, Canary, and the Caribbean Climate Justice Alliance. Thank you, Christine Samwaroo of the Breadfruit Collective, for your beautiful brainchild. And thanks as well to Paula Joseph and her team, the Marketing Aid, for their unwavering technical support. And finally, we would like to thank you, the patron, for joining us this evening for this very important discussion about our rights as environmental defenders. We hope to continue the conversation over the course of the campaign. You can follow the Breadfruit Collective on all social media platforms. And don't forget to sign up for our newsletter to gain updates throughout the campaign. Thank you for your time and your attention. Good evening and goodbye.